Welcome to Dig Deep, the mining podcast. In this podcast, we go deep into mining news, hot topics, and live interviews with mining professionals and leading figures in the mining industry. Introducing your host, Rob Tyson, founder and director of Mining International and Mining International Executive, a leading global mining recruitment and headhunting agency.
Hi, mining community. Welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep, the mining podcast. And today's guest is Rick Trotman, who's the president and CEO of Barksdale Resources, a junior miner who are acquiring, exploring, and de-risking high-quality precious and base metal projects in the Americas. And they have assets in southern Arizona and Mexico. Rick's a geologist by background and has worked for the likes of Barrick and Yamana Gold before moving into securities and private equity before taking the helm at Barksdale Resources over 5 years ago. So he's here today to just tell us a little bit more about the company and the projects that they're involved in and potentially much more. So that's welcome Rick to the podcast. How you doing, Rick?
I'm well. Thanks for having me on, Rob.
No, appreciate your time as well. Obviously, we met a few months ago at a mining conference. So wondered if you can tell our audience a little bit about your career, about your background, so our audience knows a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a geologist by training. So I've got a master's degree in economic geology, which means that I like to solve puzzles and look for things and, try to find things that are meaningful and try to find a value in things that are meaningful. I banged around on rocks for a couple of years in Nevada, and then went down to Mexico for Meridian Gold. That company was eventually sold, and I moved off to New York City, worked in the kind of mining equities world. So, looking at different securities, all kind of large gold miners, kind of doing the whole buy, sell, hold kind of recommendation thing, which was okay. It was nice that it taught me a little bit more about the financial system, how these companies work, what makes them tick, what investors like to see, things like that. But ultimately, it wasn't my forte. And I moved into private equity from there, went out to Denver, worked with resource capital funds. And that's where I really kind of developed my passion for investing in little spivvy exploration stories. I probably put $300 or $400 million to work in the mining sector while working there at RCF. Everything ranging from little, $500,000 investments in juniors all the way up to kind of $75-100 million investments in gold mining companies that are building development stage projects. So, but my passion always was in that junior explorer segment of the business. That's where you get the real torque. That's where you get the passion of discovery and the excitement and those huge kind of run-ups in value and things like that. So I've always been attracted to that segment of the business. Ultimately ended up moving to Barksdale to try to get more exposure to stories like that, and specifically Barksdale, because I thought the story was good enough that I could put all my eggs in that one basket. So that's what led me here. Those are some of my skill sets, but inch deep and a mile wide, as they say. So kind of got experience in a little bit of everything.
Yeah. So just wonder if you can just, obviously, like I mentioned, you've been with the company over 5 years now. Just wondering if you can just give our listeners an overview of Barksdale Resources.
Yeah, so Barksdale is a base metal exploration company focused primarily in the desert Southwest, and that would be of the United States as well as northern Mexico. So we've got assets in southern Arizona and then in northern Sonora State. And so we are looking for typically polymetallic deposits, things that have more than one economic mineral, with the core assets being our Arizona properties, which are kind of porphyry and related deposits that are kind of copper, silver, lead, zinc style assets. So those are the key focus, and we've got some real humdingers in the portfolio. So it's pretty exciting.
Is there a reason why you focused on polymetallic metals?
Yeah, so when I joined the company, we that's the base asset that was already there. So I kind of showed up a little late to the game. The company was formed and secured an asset, did a first fundraising effort, kind of a group of investors all kind of banded together and got the hard yards done. And then I came a couple of months later. So that asset was already in place. It's called Sunnyside. So I didn't kind of work on that initial deal. But the reason I joined was because of that asset and the attractive nature of it, what it represented, and kind of the risks and opportunities there just made sense, especially for a fellow like me that was looking to be kind of a first-time CEO. I needed to have a story behind me that made sense. If I could show a picture to my grandma and she understood what it meant from a geologic standpoint, then, half the battle is already won. And that's what Sunnyside represented to me. It was a great opportunity and a simple story. Now the execution on that story has taken a lot longer than I ever imagined with permitting and things of that nature, but the underlying value opportunity is still just as alive as it was when I joined the company. So lots of excitement ahead of us.
Yeah. So I wonder if you just tell us a little bit more about the Sunnyside project.
Yeah. So Sunnyside, similar to a lot of places in Arizona, there's a lot of kind of copper porphyry centers. Sunnyside just happens to have a very large one that's all intact. Throughout Arizona, you tend to get these very large porphyry copper systems, and then they've been kind of diced up, moved around, flipped over. Sunnyside has a very large porphyry that's in place, but rotated slightly. And the awesome part about that, Rob, is while the porphyry itself isn't a stunner, it's got, decent mineralization associated with it. It created something off the side of it, an accessory deposit, kind of a skarn and manto system that's world class. And the opportunity for us at Sunnyside is to basically connect the dots between a very large porphyry copper and a very large carbonate replacement system that's immediately next door. So basically the gap in between, that's the zone that we're looking to explore and show that this is one continuous, very large deposit. And just by happenstance, the neighbor is building a mine on that very large carbonate replacement deposit. So, it's a very important asset to look at. It's a very exciting asset to explore. And ultimately, we want to prove how much of this beast is sitting on our property.
So I just wondering if you can just tell us a little bit more about obviously your neighbour in Arizona, and how important is their development and in terms of moving your project along?
Yeah, it's critically important. So the neighbor is a company called South 32. They're a very large, diversified mining company headquartered out of Australia. It was a spin out of BHP Billiton's non-core mining assets a few years back. They mine coal, they mine copper, they mine lead, zinc, silver, all over the world, nickel. And this is one of their kind of key assets in the Americas. And so they spent a lot of money buying this asset at over $2 billion Canadian. And they put hundreds of millions of bucks into it, kind of from a de-risking standpoint. So for us, having a neighbor that is very aggressive on spending, very aggressive pushing that project towards development, it's fantastic because each dollar that they put into the ground de-risks the whole district, right? It's a stamp of validation that investors can use, that groups like myself can use to know that all of the effort, all of the investment is worthwhile, because ultimately the district will be economic from a development standpoint. And these guys are, embarking on a very large capital project to put this mine in production, or at least they're making that construction decision here in the very short term. And so, them moving forward to build this mine de-risks the whole area, and kind of puts that stamp of validation right squarely on our project. Because ultimately, if we have the other part of the same ore body, and should it hold together from a continuity standpoint, and should it have high grades, that all is just a cherry on top.
The phrase grade is king seems to be a secret to mining success. What advantages would you say that the Sunnyside project has over the South 32's Taylor Hermosa project?
I don't know if we have any distinct advantages. I mean, quite honestly, we haven't explored it yet. I think what we can bring to the table is the potential for more high grade ore. So typically in these types of systems, the closer you get to the heat source, the more fluid flow you've seen. The more fluid flow a rock sees, generally, the higher the chances are that you're going to see an accumulation of grade. And so, what we're hoping for is that as you get closer to that porphyry edge, that you see a kind of a thick skarn developed, which could and typically are, higher grade resources. And then that will kind of transition out into these series of mantos. And we know that those are high grade. So the more high grades that we can find, the more incentivization there is for those, ores to be mined one day. The graded king, kind of philosophy is true. Why mine 10 tons of ore to get the same metal, that you could get from 1 ton of ore? It costs significantly less to mine that 1 ton. There's a lot less risk involved, and you get, better margins and things like that. So people are always going to focus on the higher grades because they accelerate, cash flow, they accelerate or they increase your margins, things like that. So the goal for us is not to find a sea of, kind of moderate grade material or low grade material. We don't want to be the biggest. What we want to do is show that there's something important there, and important things in this business, tend to do well from a valuation standpoint. And at the end of the day, we're in this endeavor because we want to make people money, the people that have supported us along the way.
Yeah. And I wondered, if you can just tell us a little bit about the management team and the people behind the business to support Barksdale's sort of progress.
Yeah, so the management team is pretty small. We keep it all nimble and pretty compact. I run the show, and I've got a couple of VPs under me that are very good at what they do. So I've got a fellow named Tom that runs all of our exploration programs. He's got 40 plus years of experience. I got a fellow named Andy who kind of looks at all the development style efforts, looks at, engineering scenarios, things of that nature on kind of our project in Mexico, as well as some of the de-risking things at Sunnyside. And then I've got a lady named Terry Ann, who's phenomenal and handles everything from the investor relations standpoint. So that's kind of the core team. We have other players kind of outside of the VP suite, although it's only a handful. And that's the technical team on the ground, and that's a growing team. So, good folks, all in it to win it, so to speak, all aimed at the same targets. And then that's complemented with, a great shareholder base that's been very patient. They understand what we're looking for. They understand the timing, they understand all the risks, and they also understand all the opportunities. And so, that combination of a great team and a great shareholder base, that's the key in the mineral exploration business. You can't have, kind of fly-by-night folks that, are only looking at what their potential returns are over the next 2 months before they move on to the next investment. We look for long-term stable shareholders that kind of have a thesis that aligns with ours related to the company. And that goes for the management team as well. They all have to kind of believe in the same outcomes and believe in the same strategy to achieve those outcomes. And that's what we have here.
Wondering if you just expand on your shareholder base.
Sure. Yeah, it's varied, but it's quite concentrated. We have probably 70% of our stock in the hands of the top 40 investors, and that ranges from institutional funds, mostly Americans at this point. Groups like Crescat, US Global, but we have lately picked up a couple of funds in Europe as well as some funds in Canada. I would say overall, roughly a quarter of our stock is in the hands of funds. Another quarter of our stock is in the hands of really good kind of corporates. That includes Tech Resources, which is a very large, diversified mining company. They've been a supporter for us for a long time. and have made multiple investments in the company. Same thing with Cisco Development Corp, and then Tusk Mineral Exploration as well. That's a company that's run by a fellow named Randy Rifle. Yeah, and then there's a couple of high net worth people that are in there as well, roughly 20% of the stock. And, they tend to be mining CEOs that and kind of power players that know how to invest and are in it for kind of big swings, so to speak. So we've got all the right people in there. The stock is pretty tight. We don't have a lot of free float. Management owns a decent amount, mind you. I wasn't there at the beginning. I didn't get any of those, fun 1 cent pieces of paper. I bought most of mine on market or through option exercises, but I still have, 1.4 million shares. So, we're all invested in this. We're all aligned. And it's a great shareholder register that we have.
Wonder if you can just tell us a little bit about your projects in Mexico as well.
Yeah, the projects in Mexico are interesting projects. They're kind of taking a backseat to Arizona now that we're getting close to having our permits to drill at Sunnyside. But we have a project called San Javier down there. It's a copper gold system. It's in a district that's anchored by our third or fourth largest shareholder, Cisco Development. They've got a little gold mine there. And so, we're kind of in a good neighborhood. We've got great prospectivity for copper resources. We have a resource there, nearly 500 million pounds of copper in the ground, kind of oxide resources. And we're completing a PEA on that right now to kind of ascribe some value to it. So we should have that out here in the next month or so. And so, like I said, that's kind of taken a backseat to Arizona at this point, but it's a key piece of optionality for our shareholders. So, whether we ultimately sell it down the road, joint venture it off, combine it with another entity, or what have you, there's lots of, or even advance it ourselves. There's lots of opportunities there. And the key in this space is to have lots of different options for paths to proceed. And that's what we have with San Javier.
What would you say to potential investors that were looking to potentially invest in Barksdale, and why should they follow you and the company?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd tell them to do their homework and take a look. I think we've got a lot to offer. I think we've got some great projects. I think that ultimately, if we achieve what we think we can achieve, the potential is great for everyone to make a lot of money. And that's what ultimately you want in the junior explorer investment space. So, do your homework, look at Barksdale, and hopefully buy some bro.
And what are your thoughts on the junior market in, I suppose, the jurisdictions that you're working in, whether that's in the US or whether it's just in Arizona or even in South America? What are you seeing in the junior space at the moment?
It's all over the map, Rob. Latin American countries right now seem to be going a bit crazy. Mexico, for instance, is kind of rammed through a couple of different new mining laws, kind of focused on mining. Kind of the creeping expropriation type stuff. So that's not fun. Chile is doing the same thing. Most of these countries are kind of all leaning the same way, right? And it's that slow creeping expropriation where they slowly raise taxes, raise royalties, all these types of things, make it a little bit harder to do business, but only a little bit. So that way you're still kind of motivated enough to keep things moving forward. So it's a bit of a pain, but it's the lay of the land. The United States has just always been just a giant pain. The permitting regime in the States is just broken. You've got a lot of NIMBYs in the States. Those are people that are, not in my backyard. So that while they might be fine with something, conceptually, they just don't want it to be in their backyard. Their backyards tend to be very big. They don't want it in their regions. So, it's tough. But there's a flip side to that, in that, in the United States, if you have something that's worthwhile, you tend to get a big premium on it because it's a pain in the butt to push things forward. And so if you have something that's of good quality and you're able to advance it, you can get a premium that is significant over most other countries, right? Because the barrier to entries are there. And so that's why we like the United States. There's a certain amount of comfort that, your tax regimes and your royalty rates and all those types of things aren't just going to suddenly go flying up. But you do have to deal with the politics and you have to deal with the people, and those tend to be a bear. So, you take the good with the bad. Unfortunately, the ore is where the ore is, and you've got to kind of, go to where the minerals are.
Yes, certainly. And what's the outlook for the company over the sort of next 6 to 12 months?
Well, we're going to start drilling, and they call it the truth machine, the drill rig. So we're going to start putting results out into the market and hopefully show people what we have. And if Mother Nature plays along, we could have something that's pretty important, pretty exciting, and the drill rig will tell us all here soon.
And lastly, the audience that listen to this podcast, and also obviously on our YouTube channel, are predominantly people within the mining industry, whether they're in operations or whether they're in corporate. We also obviously have people, suppliers into the industry, and obviously investors as well. So I just wondered if you had any last words that you want to give our audience.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I would say right now that, mining markets are tough. You've got to kind of do your work, and you've got to find the little bright shining lights in this dark sea of gloominess. At some point the tide will come in, all the boats will rise, but you've got to find those ones that really resonate with you and are meaningful to you. And that involves doing a bit of work. So there's lots of hidden gems out there. Try to find them and buy them, because at some point that tide will come in and things will just go crazy. And you have to be in it to win it at the end of the day. Certainly.
Rick, really appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on to the podcast. Give us an overview of Barksdale Resources, and give us an overview, obviously, of your assets in Arizona and Mexico. Really appreciate your time. Wish you all the well for the remainder of the year. Perhaps you might want to come on next year and give us an update on the projects. And really appreciate your time.
Yeah, that'd be lovely, Rob. And thanks for having me on. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, no worries. And thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed that episode. Appreciate your continued support. Please keep sharing these episodes amongst people within the industry. So obviously follow mining professionals, but also people outside of the industry, whether they're investors or not. We need to educate the wider world, should I say. So people that are not in the mining industry, they need to understand what mining is, because I think a lot of people out there don't know what mining is and what value obviously it's needed for mankind and for us to evolve as a species. Mining also plays an important role in certain jurisdictions and certain countries, and does provide a lot of communities with resources. So appreciate if you can keep sharing this episode to far as wide as possible. So until next time, happy mining.
Thank you for listening. Remember to reach out to Rob via the show notes, and be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Until next time, happy mining, helping each other to improve the mining industry.